good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to a brand new edition of Social Confoes. Diego, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, doing good. Happy to have a guest again this week and excited to learn more about what's in store for us. And basically, it's someone we're pretty familiar with. We've seen him in action recently. But before I go into that, quick announcements. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel at Confoes, youtube.com/Confoes. We're also on Instagram. So subscribe there and follow us on Instagram at Confoes and also subscribe to our newsletter at confoes.substack.com. And if you're feeling generous, we also have, where is this button again? Yeah,
There
support
you go.
QR code at pay.confoes.com if you want to support the show and help us grow. With that being said, I think it's time to introduce our guest.
Yes, and
So,
you sneak previewed into something saying, hey, what we might get into in the future. So, is there a link between the future and our guest of today?
yeah, so if we're talking about the future, we still need to talk about the present and also the past. And I've known our current guest, or I've gotten to know him actually maybe 5, 6 years ago. We had local hackathons here, the yearly IT Core hackathon, and he was one of the judges. I think he also did session on in-depth session on data analytics and data-driven innovation, and that's kind of how we got to know each other. I remember vividly after the hackathon, we were tired and I had to bring him home to his Airbnb somewhere here in the city. So I dropped him off, and we had a nice fun chat. And lo and behold, this year, I had the honor to introduce him during our social media conference, Suriname. And we talked about the future, the impact of AI, and basically innovation that it can have on us. And I'm talking about none other than Leslie Lee Fook, and basically a legend in the business world, a revolutionary digital transformation strategist. And he has a fount of knowledge about digital transformation, AI, data driven innovation, so robotics. So we're excited to learn more about the story behind Leslie. So not just about the AI and innovations, but how did Leslie get there, and kind of what kind of pivotal role does this play in his life? So Leslie, welcome to Social Confoes. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Hey, excited to be here, guys. Good to connect again. How are you guys
So,
doing?
we're doing great, and we're going to start with the hardest question. Leslie, how difficult is it to swim for 5 kilometers?
It is terribly difficult. What are we talking about here? Are we talking about the cross harbor that I did years ago?
Yes, yes, of course. We
You
want
guys
to
did
know
some
because,
digging, man.
yeah, so I was wondering because I have challenged myself to run 5 kilometers next year. But for you to swim it, I
Yeah.
definitely have to find out what was the hardest part to swim
The,
those
the,
5 kilometers.
the hardest part is I have a deep fear of open water. So to do an open water swim, that was a big one for me. But it was fascinating. Just to give you the long story short, the race, the guy who won the race, he won in 45 minutes. Um, the first time I ran 3 kilometers, it took me 45 minutes, right? But he swam it in 45 minutes.
Yeah.
But they actually stopped the race. So everybody who after this time, they pull them out of the water at an hour and 30 minutes, and I finished at an hour 23. So I was like the second to last person out of the water.
Well, the important thing is finishing, right? If
I
it's a
finished it. Yeah.
marathon, any long form kind of competition, it's about getting through it.
Yeah,
Because it's a
absolutely. So
battle against
that was a
yourself.
lot of fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a lot of fun.
So we have a traditional saying in Suriname, which is "Who's your father? Who's your mother?" And we would love to start off with how does somebody with such a thick Trini accent not look like your typical Trini when it
Yeah,
comes to business. Tell us a little bit
yeah.
about
Well, that I
where you
had
came from.
absolutely, yeah. So I'm Trini, but I absolutely had no choice in the matter. So my three of my four grandparents came from China. My fourth grandparent, my grandmother on my dad's side, she is very Caribbean. So she's native Indian. She's Arawak,
Oh,
black,
okay.
Indian, Spanish mixed. So I came out with a little bit of that and a lot of Chinese and a heavy Trini accent. So people always ask me when I come to Suriname, why do I sound like Kes?
So your parents were both brought up in Trinidad as well?
Yeah, so I am yeah, I'm second generation Trinidadian. But it baffles me every time I go somewhere else and I see I didn't notice, and we could talk about bias later, but I didn't notice, but I have a Chinese bias. So when I see an Asian person that isn't speaking Chinese or isn't sounding Trini, it seems weird to me. But that's a different conversation.
Awesome. So, did you have parents that were as strict as most Asian parents are? Or did you always?
I
My mom is Asian, is Chinese
Yeah,
as well, and
yeah,
whenever I came home with a grade that wasn't to her liking, and I would
yeah,
be like, "Hey, but at least I passed,"
yeah,
she would say like, "How much does your niece have?" And I would like, "Oh, she had this grade." That she was like, "You have to have the same grade." How was
yeah.
that for you growing up?
So I mentioned I was like third generation, and I think it's a pendulum effect. So I think first generation immigrants, they're always very strict on the kids and they have to succeed, and because they had a tough time just moving to that new country, settling in and everything. And my mom was the complete opposite. So I dropped out of secondary school. So I don't know what the school tiers are like in Suriname, but I went to fifth form. I barely made it through fifth form. I had to repeat fifth form, and then I went into sixth form back into one of the more prestigious colleges, and I only went for of 2 years. I went for 6 months. Um, so I didn't, from an academic perspective, have anything that would set me up for, I guess, a successful career today.
So how do you go from that and before maybe even we go there, like growing up, you mentioned biases a bit
Mhm.
earlier, and if we look at growing up, Jean-Luc mentioned not looking at a typical Trinidadian. How was that growing up in a social setting, like
Yeah. So
friends,
super. Yeah.
events, school? Like how was that for you?
Yeah.
What were you
So
feeling like
super
included
interesting. Yeah.
or
Yeah. Well, I didn't. So I grew up with my grandmother for no particular reason. When I was a couple of months old, my parents were doing renovations on the house, and the roof caved in and almost killed me. I was just a couple of months old. So my grandmother was completely pissed off, and she said, "You need to send him up here." So I went at a couple of months old to my grandmother's house, and weeks turned into months, and months turned into years, and I ended up living with my grandmother. Um, Now my uncles, they all played sports, they all played hockey, and Chinese in Trinidad, that generation of Chinese, they integrated into the whole society. So I didn't actually have any Chinese friends. They were all Trini friends. So up to the age of about 12, I didn't understand race. I didn't really know that we were different. Or we are different, but we actually all the same. But you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
I didn't understand race till I was 12 until there's this kid in school who was describing a next kid, and he said, well, and he used an ethnicity. And I was like, what is that? And then he had to describe race to me at about 12. I didn't understand it. So I never felt that I didn't belong or there was a bias against me or anything like that. In fact, it's quite the opposite. My entire life, Jaluk, I don't know if you're anything like this. The first time I've been in a room with all Asians was on a trip to Canada. I think I was in my mid 20s. So I was dating this girl, and we went up to a house party in China, in Canada, and it was full of Chinese Trinidadians. And I'd never been in an environment before where there were more Asians in the room. And my second time was in China, but I felt strange in those circumstances as opposed to being in a typical, I guess, Caribbean type environment.
It's funny because I think the first, I mean, understanding what race is and experiencing racism are two different things, I guess, as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because the first time I experienced racism when I was studying in Europe, I
Mm-hmm.
never really experienced it in Suriname ever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also something that's weird. And for me personally, when I was at China, especially the southern part, I felt at home. So
Mm-hmm.
they might not look at me and say like, "Yeah, you should be at home here," but I actually
Yeah.
felt at home.
Haka.
The Hakka, especially the Hakka part of China. And the interesting thing is that when I was in China, I would watch the old man in the park playing card games that we used to play in high school as well. Like Chinese card
Yep.
games that we would play in
Mm-hmm.
high school, they were playing
Mm-hmm.
there in the park with kind of similar rules because I was checking the playing style and the
Yep.
rules were quite similar. So these are really interesting things that you're not aware of. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if it's
Mm.
something that you have in your family as well, but I'm married to a Dutch woman, and the Dutch are very blunt and transparent about things.
Mm-hmm.
We as Asians, especially Chinese, we don't talk that much, especially
Mm-hmm.
not when it comes to feelings either.
Mm-hmm.
So you just live through life and actually don't talk about these things unless they
Mm-hmm.
require you to talk about these things.
Yeah, that's very cool. So my wife isn't Dutch.
Yeah,
She she's Trini, but she's very, she likes to talk through things and discuss things. But I am quite, very much like that. So the way, like Chinese families, I don't think they show a lot of like the way we show love is different. So we're not really huggy, kissy, like chatty, emotional type people. We would like you come to our house, we give you a plate of food, and that's how we show love. Jaluk, I don't know that's similar for you, but that's how Asians express love, and so it's
Yeah.
something that I am very mindful of. So I might again depend the pendulum effect. So I'm very huggy, kissy, chatty with my kids because I'm always aware that that was kind of missing for me.
Yeah, yeah,
interesting.
yeah. That's really cool. And the language of food, I think, speaks cross cultures.
Oh, international.
And
Yeah, I
that's a
like it.
Caribbean thing. Definitely a Caribbean thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Okay, but
how did you transfer
yeah,
from that part, as Diego was saying? How did you get into the tech side of things? What was your
Yeah.
journey towards the
So
tech?
so I'm gonna age myself a little bit, but I went uh, at at my early 20s. I moved to the United Kingdom. So it was 1999 when I moved, and it was just before the Y2K bug and tech was booming, but I had no clue about it. Right when I first got there, I basically had everything I owned with me. I had one bag of clothes, and I had £1,000, and that was it. And I moved there in the middle of winter when I'd never really been to anywhere cool before. And from the Caribbean, I had a bag of short pants, t-shirts, and flip flops. So like
just
that
another
first like
island.
3 days, yeah, it's not an island, right? So I get there and like 700 of my £1,000 in the first week I had to spend just getting clothes to live. Um, and I had this great job. Well, this terrible but great job. That was the first job I had. Um, and it really transformed the way that I saw the world. It was actually a sales job, and I could tell you about that the next time. But I quit that job after 4 days, even after having a life changing experience, and I got a real job. And this real job was at a call center for a large telco. It was primarily invested by from BT, etc. But I got interviewed for the job, and it was an administrative job. So I would basically be typing letters and stuff to customers. And there were two options. I'd come in a daytime shift, which is kind of an 8 to 4 job, or I could do night shift. The night shift started at midnight. But I would get 30% more salary. So I was like, yes, sign me up for the night shift because I was poor back then.
Yeah,
And
you take
you
anything.
do anything, right? So I signed up for the night shift job, and the last bus to get there was like an hour and a half before work started. So I got there super early. It was only me, and I'd be sitting down there. And for the first couple of nights I was there, I saw this guy, middle of winter. He comes in, he's in t-shirt, short pants, flip-flops. He goes into this little back room, and he comes out 30 minutes later and he's gone. That's his work day. So a night I stopped him. I was like, Paul, well, what do you do? He's like, I'm in IT. So I was like, man, how do you get into IT, right? Because I want to work 30 minutes a day. And he said, go do this course called the MCSE. And if you do the MCSE, you'll get paid £25 an hour. I was like, £25 an hour. And that was a lot of money, especially back in 99.
Hey,
So
it is. That's a pretty good mark
yeah,
for a year for an hourly salary, man.
yeah. So I go into to HR. I've been working there for like 3 weeks now. I go into HR and I say, look, would it be okay if I got an advance on my salary? And it's like, well, this lady comes out, right, just straight after my shift. And she's like, no, we don't do advances. But what do you want it for? And I explained, the IT thing. And she said, well, we don't do advances, but we could give you a grant. I was like, a grant? Free money? Okay, cool. So where do I sign up? And man, I've been working there for 3 weeks, right? Like, I'm not like a long-standing employee or anything. So I get this grant to study this program. And, eventually when Paul left, which is a couple months later, a vacancy came up in the technology team, and that's kind of how I got there. But to get even practice, like why I had the confidence to go and ask for the MCSC, for the money, for the grant, for the advance, is it was so expensive to call the Caribbean back then that it was something like £1 a minute or something like that. It was ridiculous expensive to call. And I was so poor, I couldn't afford to call home regularly. So my younger brother, who's really the smart one in the family, he talked me through building a computer over the phone so that I could have a computer, I could get dial-up internet access, and I could use ICQ to communicate with my family. And that is kind of how I got into technology. So I never studied technology. I dropped out of high school. I was poor, so it's just just being resourceful is kind of how I ended up in this space.
Oh, that's a cool story. But two things. Why did you
Mhm.
go to the UK in the first place? And I
Yeah.
am curious about that 4-day life-changing experience you had at a sales job. Like, what was it exactly that was
Yeah.
so life-changing for you?
Yeah. So why did I go to the UK? So the reality is I had at 19, I had a very bad breakup. At 19, like your first love is the deepest love that you ever had. And I was like, no, I need a change of scenery. I ended up moving to the UK. Um, so when I was there, I'd already spent out most of my money on clothes. And I would do anything for a job, right? So back when I was in Trinidad, I had a good job. I worked at the bank, right? And in the UK, I wasn't picky, so I was going through the classifieds, and I saw this job, and it read like an advertising agency. So my aunt was living there, so I moved in with her, and I showed her the classified ad, and she's like, "I'm not going to tell anything. Go check it out for yourself." I was like, "Okay, cool." So I call them, and they say, "Okay, well, meet us at the Plymouth Market at 7 a.m. right upstairs." So I was expecting like this massive like superstore, like a Asda or Tesco or some big large grocery. It was like the public market. So they were like dead cows hanging upside down. They were like just fresh produce. It was a proper market, right? So I go upstairs in market, and that's where they're serving tea and coffee and breakfast and stuff. And the folks that were interviewing me, they stood out because everybody looked like regular sort of people. And then there was this group of people who were like all suit and tie, long coats, jackets, three-piece suits. And that was the folks I was interviewing with. So there's this girl I met. She was interviewing me. Her name was Sarah. And she was from Falkland. I don't know if you know this, but there are like 1,000 people living in Falkland. So Sarah, if you're seeing this, Sarah, I've been looking for you for a long time to say hello and thanks for the job. But you're never gonna meet anybody from Falkland Islands, right? So Sarah interviewed me, and she asked me the question, like, this is 99. She said, if you wanted to reach somebody, like what medium would you use? Right? How would you get to them? Right? Where would you reach them? So I was like, 99. I was like, well, TV, newspaper. She's like, no, we go to their houses. I was like, what? She's like, but we're leaving now. Would you like to come with? Right. So I was like, okay, cool. I'm here already. So I jumped in the car, and then we drove for about 45 minutes to a different city. And what they were doing, they were dressed up like fancy lawyers, and they were knocking doors selling pizza cards. Now back then I was such an introvert. I was super, super shy. I'm still very much an introvert. But I went up there and I had this thick Caribbean accent. So my Trini accent is watered down. It's soft now, right? People understand me. But if you listen to a Trini and speaking to an ex Trini, they speak fast and you'll never understand a single word. So that's the accent I had when I first moved there. So I was knocking doors in a country, in a brand new country. I'd been there for like 3 days, selling pizza cards to random strangers who didn't even understand me. And I was a super, super introvert. So it was this whole like they talked us through the system. Now I'd never sold anything, and my perception of salespeople are like insurance salespeople and are like used car salesmen, right? So it's not something I ever wanted to do. But I gave it a try. So they told me what to do. So funniest thing, I'm sorry, this is virtual. You can't see what I'm doing, but you knock on the door, right? And you can see me adjusting my legs, right? So without moving forward, right? Your top of the body stays the same, but your leg, imagine my leg moves forward and it's now in the doorway. So they can't slam the door on you when they open the door. And then they develop, like you break it down, you develop some rapport with them, you make them laugh, and you try to sell them a pizza card. And basically it's like a Domino's discount card. So you don't actually get a pizza, you just get discounts. Why this was so life changing is because the first door that I knocked on and the person opened that door, I went like this. I was like, and nothing came out. Right. So I froze up. And the guy, all I remember, we call him Waff. Right. And I know this guy for 4 days of my life. I'll never forget his name because he changed my life. He put his arm around me after. Well, I froze up and he jumped in and he continued and he sold actually that person. So he put his arm around me and he took me to the side. He said, Les, nobody ever done this before in my life. He said, Les, I see something in you. And I felt like he really took me under his wing and he was coaching me up on like how to sell and how to speak to people and stuff. And for the first 3 days, it cost me more money to get to work than I actually made because it was straight commission. I sold nothing for the first couple of days. And then the fourth day, like this light went off in my head and I sold 9 pizza cards. And that worked out to basically 9 pizza cards, my week's wages in commission for a whole week of work at the bank. I sold air. I sold a pizza card. And I made what a great salary in Trinidad was paying me for a whole week of work. And when I did that and people didn't understand me and I was selling nothing air basically, I was like, man, I could do anything. And that completely changed my life. So I came home that night and then I got a call from the real company and the real company said, hey, we got a job. And I was like, okay, I'm gone. but but on that team, there was a helicopter pilot. There was Sarah from Seychelles Islands. There was Falkland Islands. I keep saying Seychelles. She's from Falkland. It was some amazing, amazing people that I'll never forget. And that was 24 years ago.
Have you ever done door-to-door sales, Diego?
I have not. I have not, and
Hey,
I'm
it is an
really
experience. It's an
intrigued by
experience.
this story.
Yeah, it's an experience.
Just
When I
listening to it.
when I meet you guys up, I'll show you some. I'll show you some tactics next time.
Yeah, I haven't door-to-door. I haven't done door-to-door,
Yeah,
but I have stood like in cities trying people to convince to donate for Greenpeace and those kind of things.
yeah. Did you
And
get any training for that? Did it teach you stuff?
not really, not really.
Yeah,
It's more
it's
on
an
the
art,
job.
you know.
And
Yeah,
these things are like for students, these are like the best jobs
oh
were
yeah,
20 years ago. 20 years ago, they were the best jobs because they had the best commissions. So if you
yeah.
were able to sales, and I
Mm,
also learned how to get out of those things as well, because you can easily, if somebody sells it well, you feel guilty and you want to donate or you want to purchase. And these kind of things, it's sometimes really
yeah.
hard to get out of the contract. So I don't know how it was to get off from, if somebody took a pizza card from you, how hard it was to cancel the subscription. But these
Oh,
kind of
it's
things
a
are,
one off.
yeah,
It was you actually paid £20 and to buy the card. And once you
yeah,
had the card, like if you ate pizza every day for 6 months, it would be worth it,
You
yeah.
right?
basically buy You commit to
discounts
buying the thing
Yeah,
for a
from them.
discount,
yeah,
but you
Yeah,
already gave them the
yeah.
money
You
basically.
yeah.
already
It's
gave
like
them. There's
you
there's
gave
no
them the
money back,
money.
right? But in hindsight, guys, I look at my career 24, 25 years later, and it's a skill that if I had today, because that was my exposure to trade. I sold for 4 days of my life. If it's a skill that I had today, it would change everything. Because I believe sales, or even if I sales for me, it sounds like a cheap word. If persuasion is a technique, is a skill set that we all need. And persuasion isn't necessarily about selling. It's getting your kid to go have a shower. Yeah, getting your kid to have like vegetables. It's getting your wife not to buy that very next expensive clothing item or shoe, right? So we all need, anytime you're in a situation where it is I want or I need, you're in a role of sales slash persuasion as a skill I wish that I developed earlier on in my career.
So now
Yeah,
you're in London, and I have to ask the question:
Mm.
London versus Manchester, which is better and why?
I didn't spend much time in Manchester, but I didn't move to London first off. So I've been to
Oh,
Manchester, but where I first moved to was Plymouth. And had I moved to London, so Plymouth is like the sticks. It's
mhm.
like it's like Brokopondo, right? If you move to Suriname, kind of thing, right? Um, so I moved to Plymouth, and it's a small city. It's 500,000 people. It's by our
Yeah.
standards large, right? It's almost all of Suriname, like in terms of people. But that's a small city. So I moved to Plymouth, but people were kind. They were curious. They were nice. They were friendly. They were chat. Now that's
But
also
the
where I first.
British, the British are always very polite.
Yeah, but they were but so the older group, they were polite, good morning, whatever. But the younger ones, they were kind, but they were also kind of curious. I did experience racism when I was there, but both, and racism, people say racism is a bad word. I think it's both. I think it could be positive and negative. So it closed doors for me, but it also opened doors for me. And what's strange is it wasn't actually my race that opened doors for me. It was the fact that I was Caribbean. So as people got to know me, or they heard my voice, and they became curious because my face doesn't match my accent.
yeah, that's a dissonance in like what's going
Yeah.
on.
So it creates a little bit of curiosity. And for example, that job that I got at the large call center, um, her her dad worked in the military, and she was born in Jamaica. So when she heard my accent, I became a little more interesting for her, and maybe that was an edge for me to get that job. Obviously, the negative racism we experience all about the place, but that was one example of how being from the Caribbean opened up some opportunities for me as well.
Awesome story. And that of the skill, I think last episode we talked about it one thing. And I think I mentioned sales, and I like how you framed it with persuasion. I remember Nadira's session during the social media conference. I don't know which year it was exactly, the second or the
I
third
think
year.
it's a 2017
Yeah.
or 20, no,
And
2018 or 2019. Yeah,
she
The
framed
links below, guys.
yeah. She framed she was talking about especially content from the book psychology influence the psychology of persuasion,
Yep.
and it's an amazing book. I gotta say it really talks about the tactics, so I
Mhm.
would recommend that. I'm not sure if you've read it, Leslie. um, so that's definitely something I would recommend. But now going from you've got your stripes in IT, you got the grant, you've gotten through
Yeah.
the training, you've gotten into IT. So how did that now transition from
Yeah.
working somewhere, and then when did you start diving deeper and going off on your own
Yeah, so
after?
that's actually a great pivot back to John Luke's last question. So, how did it compare to London? So I gotten this job. So Paul had moved on. I got a role in IT. I didn't get a increase in salary. They just transferred me to IT. So now I was on a rotating shift. I was learning from all the other guys. It was great. But my visa was a work travel visa. So I could either work part time for 2 years, it's a 2-year visa, or I could work full time for 1 year. So I woke up one morning and HR called me and like, Les, you've been working here for a year and your permit only allows you to work for 1 year. We got to say goodbye. So I was in Plymouth. Things were going great. I was saving money. I was like enjoying myself. And then I had to go look for something else. Now, I couldn't survive another year in the UK without working. I had to work. So I was like, okay, time to move to London. So we were at a friend's house. I think Gladiator, the movie just came up. We were watching Gladiator on a Saturday evening at his house. And I was like, well, yeah, this is a great movie. What you doing tomorrow? He's like, well, I'm going up to London. And I was like, London? Okay, cool. So I went home. I said, hey, Auntie, I'm moving to London. So I made a decision that evening. And I jumped in his car the next day. And I moved to London that following day. Now, when I was in Trinidad, maybe a year plus before, I was having a chat with a colleague and we planned to live together. So he was actually in London already. And I called him. I was like, hey, Daniel, I'm coming to your house. He's like, what do you mean come to my house? I was like, well, I'm moving to London. He's like, you can't come here. We're full. I was like, oh shit, because I'm committed, man. Like I'm on the way. I'm in the car. He's like, here's what I'll do. I'll let you crash on the sofa for a night. And that was brutal, right? So I get to his house with Daniel, and I'm just calling around because there are tons of Trinis. I'm sure there are tons of Caribbean people everywhere. So I'm calling around to my Trini network to find somewhere to live in London. And one of my good friends now, a guy called Brett. Brett is like, yeah, we have a room, right? You could squeeze in. So I go to Brett's house, and it was the cupboard. They had all the guys that lived there. They had their suitcases, they had their like winter coats, their heavy stuff, their boots in the cupboard. So they took everything out, and I slept. And I got the cupboard to sleep in. Right, I slept in the cupboard for about 6 months. But I
Nice,
get up there.
nice room.
Yeah. So I get up there, and I'm not working. Money's running out fast. London is expensive, and I'm interviewing. I'm sending out resumes like crazy. But London is competitive. It's not Plymouth. And I first moved to London. I had to be back home really, really quickly. And what I found out quickly is that I was actually living in the hood in London. So I lived in this place called Stonebridge Park, and on the first week in London, I was there. I got in a fight on the tube in Stonebridge Park. It was rough. It was like this junkie or something, right? So London life, like people really rank it up to be something. It's not that much, right? Plymouth was way nicer. To answer your question, Jalu. So I'd applied to everywhere. London was very, very intense. I got like a little gig in the city, like a 2-week job at one of the financial institutions. It was cool, but it's super competitive. And the reality is, I didn't have a degree. I just had 1 year's experience, and I have this little course that I did back in Plymouth. So I wasn't that competitive in the market. And I got a job south of London in a place called Surrey. What that meant is, I lived in North London. What I meant was I had to travel 2 hours to work each way every day. So I would jump on the tube. I would take like 3 or 4 trains to get to where I wanted to get to. I'd work for 8 hours, jump back on the tube, spend 2 hours to get back home every day. And I only took the job because I'd completely run out of money again. But I stuck in there, and I was the second member of the team. And what that job turned into was a dream job. A year and a half later, I was making twice the Prime Minister of England. I was making twice his salary. Because I was second on the team. I was the youngest person on the team, but the second on the team. And they were just building out a UK-wide team. I actually worked for the National Health Service, where we were doing this is a £50 million pilot project. Phase 1 was £50 million, deploying health services across the whole UK. And I was living like a movie star, man. And I woke up one morning, I had a next breakup, and I was like, man, I'm heading home. But so 30 days later, I'm back in Trinidad. And I was like, okay, let me get my degree. And I'm heading back off because they're like giving away money in the UK. And that's how I got back home. And I kind of stuck around.
Seems like those breakups were pivotal moments in the decision making.
They are indeed, right? So when I came back to Trinidad, what we are doing up there is massive scale. So the colleague of mine who I actually used to live with, he was in the first house when I moved to London. He lived there, but he'd been back for a little while. And there's this pilot project that was happening for the government of Trinidad. And I looked at the spec, and that's like a weekend job. This is like a big project for the government of Trinidad. I looked at it, I was like, man, we could do that easy peasy. So we bid on it, and we won the project. And what it was a pilot project for Fujitsu that won Fujitsu like a multi-billion-dollar contract. It was a huge contract. But we did the pilot project in like 2 weekends. So when we saw like where Trinidad was, because all of the guys that did it, we were in the UK sort of living together. When we saw what the gap was, then we were like, man, like why don't we just form a company and do this stuff? Because three of us, we all kind of worked in the city, we all worked in London, and the stuff that we were doing, we realized was light years ahead of Trinidad. So we formed that. So two of us, myself and my current business partner, we formed the company back in 2004-ish. That did infrastructure services, because that's where the Caribbean was back then. Companies didn't have emails. Companies didn't have networks. They didn't have firewalls. They didn't have file servers. Some of them, man, they didn't have computers. So for the next couple of years, up until 2010, we were growing fast. We were growing organically. And we were just like deploying services, infrastructure. And we really focused on small, medium-sized businesses. So my company back then was actually called SMB Services. And we were growing great. And then in 2010, we had contract clients that were starting to cancel on us. We bids that contracts we would normally bid on and win easily, we weren't winning it anymore, and we were trying to figure out why. So I was like, ultimately, to make better decisions, you need to use your data. Now, you guys know I dropped out of school. I still can't code. I can't program. But I knew I needed to make better decisions, and to do that, you need data. So I spent weeks kind of banging away in Excel, and I wasn't making any progress. And then, when people have tough questions in life, what do? They Googled it, right? So I Googled it, and that's what I heard about a field called business intelligence, right? This is like 2010, and then I saw this tool that another life-changing moment. It completely changed my life.
Was
But
it
something
Tableau?
called Tableau, yeah.
Yeah.
So I downloaded Tableau, and this is the first time I did, right? I looked at it, I closed it off, and I went back to Excel because I just didn't get it. It was intimidating. I just didn't get it, right? So weeks had gone by, we were still losing business, we couldn't figure out why. And then this Tableau thing, it kept coming up all over the place. So this time I saw a video on YouTube, and this guy from India, he was using Tableau, and he was asking questions that were similar to mine, right? And then he was double clicking and dragging and dropping. So all I did is I downloaded it again, and I put my data, and I just followed his steps, what he was doing. And like in seconds, I realized what was happening. So our small, medium-sized customers were now moving to cloud, right? And all our customers were small, medium-sized customers. So I went to my business partner and I said, Jude, like the whole world is going to go to cloud, and we're not going to have a business in 5 years. But I think this data thing, I think everybody's going to need it. So, with your permission, let me explore this thing. So he's like, cool, you go do that. And he focused on the infrastructure services. And that's when my journey for like emerging technology, it started off. And it started off with just having to make better decisions with my data. But what I also realized in that process is that the company that was taking our business, it was our partners. So we were like Microsoft partners or Amazon partners or Google partners. And those companies were now going direct and giving cloud to our customers. It's our partners who are eating our lunch. And I didn't even know it. And that's why I'm so passionate about like us all needing to be like globally competitive, because that's what's happening to everybody. Amazon is eating your lunch right now. You don't even know
It's
it.
extremely interesting, this story, because it's the same with the social media platforms.
Mhm.
When third party applications are being built for things that people need, and people start massively using it, they start to integrate it themselves. And that's because, and they can do it much quicker because they have millions of clients already. So if
Yep.
they integrate the system that you have been using for years and making money off of, and they integrate it for free in their
Mm-hmm.
business solution, it's like game over. It's like
Yeah.
completely game over. It's really interesting that you explain it
Yeah.
in such a way because it's true.
Absolutely.
It's the
Right.
bigger companies that look, if it's not worth a while, they won't do it. But as soon as they see like, hey, this is where the market's heading, let's just include it in, and you go out of
Yeah.
business if you don't realize it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why like you always need to. So people always tell me like, I made this mistake once in my life. I fell in love with my product, right? And I was gung ho on selling my product on all these things. But I realized today you need to fall in love with your customer. You need to continue to listen to your customer, and if you focus on their needs, your business model will change, your products will change, your services will change, but you will always have a customer, which is the important part. So that was a big shift for me. And then that's how I started off with data. And what was incredible is that I knocked on every single door. So I started off with my small, medium-sized customers in Trinidad. And back then, oil was still good. Oil money was good, right? So good decisions, bad decisions. And I'd never really participated in the oil and gas economy in Trinidad because it wasn't small and medium-sized businesses. It was the large companies that were doing oil and gas. So I knocked on all my customers' doors. Nobody was interested in this data thing. I knocked on all the big companies in Trinidad, and nobody's interested. And then I was like, man, this like everybody must be wrong. Everybody is crazy, right? It's not me, all right? So I started to look outside of Trinidad, and that's how we started to get into Jamaica and expand territory. So whereas most people like today, once we come off a lockdown, people are trying to find new countries, new economies to get into. That was my story back in 20, 2014, 2015. And that's kind of where I discovered like the power of social media and how to use different channels to reach out to people, and really started to utilize some of those sales skills in a new way, of course. But I basically, at that point in time, I had to scale my operations. I had to reach out to new markets for my sofa because I didn't have a big budget. I didn't have a budget. And I developed a brand for my sofa using email. And it's funny because like people tell me about it now. So there's this colleague of mine from one of the large insurance companies, and she was sitting at the boardroom once, and then my name came up, right? And somebody's like, she knows me, the other person doesn't, right? So she's like, this is Leslie Fook guy who mailed me something. He's like, and then she's like, oh yeah, I know Leslie. And the next person said, oh yeah, I think I spoke to him at some point in time too. And everybody at the table had a similar experience, right? Because I was using email alone very effectively. And I use a strategy that it could still get me into any room that I want to. Right. So if you guys stick around to the end, I'll tell you what that strategy is. Right. But uh but basically that's how I expanded territory. And we moved from serving small, medium-sized businesses in Trinidad to basically working with the enterprise across the Caribbean. Now I could expand into North America easily, but I want to serve the Caribbean. I really want the Caribbean to be better. So I'm focused on Bermuda all the way down to Suriname. Save the last for best, or best for last.
Both ways work. I
Yeah.
want to zoom in on, you talked about decision making, and has been a lot of decision making in the course of your journey, from moving to London, having that conviction, committing to the decision. And like you said, Pan, everybody needs data, everybody's wrong. So I'm going to look
Mm.
outside the country. Where does this conviction in your decision making come from? Like, how are you so convicted? Like, do you have a process that goes on internally when you do this?
No, what I've realized over time is I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's a personality thing. So I obviously I process things. I think about it, but I don't get analysis paralysis. I make a decision. I run with it. I see the results. I test small, basically. Now, moving to different countries, necessarily testing small. Um, but I test small, and I look for a win or failure, and I see what's working, what's not working, and I increment on it quickly. So whereas most organizations would plan, they spend 6 months planning. I would make a new decision every day for 6 months, and I would figure out 6 months of what's not working, and get to a result that is 60 steps ahead of everybody else who's still planning. I take action, and I think that's a personality thing.
Got
We
it.
embrace failure. If that kind of sums it up, like
No,
failure, I'm okay with failure if we're failing forward all the time.
I was going to say because every point is a data point, and especially
Mhm.
working with data, it
Yeah,
doesn't matter if it's good or bad.
it tells you
Data
something.
points tells you something.
Yeah, correct.
Going in, and like you said, it beats anybody who's just in the planning phase for 6 months. Obviously,
Absolutely.
depending on the scope, but most of the time that will work.
Yeah.
Uh, and as we transition to the last part, we're gonna maybe go into that email strategy you talked about. I think you just use that strategy within the show, paying close enough attention. Um, there's a lot to talk about. We didn't nearly cover anything you covered during the
Oh, we didn't even talk
conference.
about
So
AI yet, which is the
yeah, for
future.
the future, maybe that's gonna have to happen in a dedicated future episode.
Yeah.
But I want to close off this episode and still focus on you. You've emerged in, the Caribbean. You've made a conscious decision as well, like to lift up the Caribbean as a whole. And what is
Yeah.
it about the Caribbean? And when
Yeah.
you are here in Suriname, especially, you also said you really enjoy Suriname. And what is it about
Mm.
the Suriname that
Yeah.
kind of speaks to
Yeah.
you and kind of
So
hooks you and grounds you
yeah.
here?
So if you speak to any North American, any European, and you ask them, would you prefer living in your country or would you prefer living in the Caribbean? Like, what would they tell you? Chances are living in the Caribbean.
If,
Most
if
of
they,
them.
yes, if they look at certain aspects, I think
Well,
I
but
think
but
it
it but
depends.
but it is so quality, right? Quality of life in the Caribbean is unsurpassed, right? I could jump in my car and I'll be at the beach in 30 minutes, right? I could, no, I'm not saying this is what you should do. I could drink a beer on the way to the beach, right? We have certain freedoms in the Caribbean that you just don't have anywhere else in the world. Now people, they get an inch and they take a mile. I get that, right? So all these freedoms come with responsibility. But living in North America, living in the UK, it's as soon as you jump off the plane in the UK, there are 10 cameras in your face. You can't sneeze without somebody knowing it, right? So like privacy, all of those things, freedom, all right, they come at a cost, a real cost when you live across there. So I think in terms of quality of life, the Caribbean is unsurpassed. Where we sort of drop the ball is the quantity of life. And that for me is now when I worked, because when I moved to the UK, all that changed is location. But I continue to work the same way I worked when I worked in Trinidad. So while I worked for companies, I didn't get up in the morning and go to the company and work there for them. I work for me. And I still maintain that today. Right. So I've always really worked for myself. I get up in the morning because I need to get for me and for my family. And when I moved to the UK, I was paid like a movie star. And the only thing that changed when I came back home or I went there was location. And do I get the same as the Prime Minister of the UK today? Not so much, even though I was making twice their salary years ago. So that's what I hope to do. I hope to create an environment where we have the quality, but we also now have the quantity of life. And I think the Caribbean is like the perfect place to do that.
That is beautifully said. Jean-Luc, any final questions,
Yeah, I
thoughts?
mean, it's even hard to say anything else or go into any other topics when it's so beautifully said. But I feel like Leslie would be a good guest to do some overrated, underrated with.
But I'll tell you what's so special about Suriname for me, guys, is that um, if you think back on what the Caribbean used to be, because I know as we become more Americanized, things are changing, right? And my first experience with Suriname is when I got there. My really good friend, She came, she picked me up at the airport at 4 a.m. Right? She drove all the way from the city, picked me up, dropped me to my hotel. She's like, let's go have a nap, go have a shower, and I'll come pick you up for lunch. She picks me up from lunch and she drives me to her parents' house. And I have Sunday lunch with her parents, with her husband, with her kids, her mom and dad. And that level of hospitality that still exists in Suriname is what the Caribbean used to be. And that's why I love Suriname so much, because of the people.
That's really interesting. Also, there's a lot of things that we can learn from Trinidad as well. But we're gonna close off with a couple of overrated, underrated. Leslie, we're gonna give you each three topics to talk about.
All right,
You
sure.
can tell us whether or not you believe it's overrated, underrated, or properly rated, and you're allowed to dive in and explain, but you're also free to just say underrated
Sure.
or overrated. Yeah, so I'm gonna kick it off, and I'm gonna keep it real easy. The oil and gas industry, is it overrated or underrated?
Overrated, man. Overrated. We're killing the planet. And it overrated.
Okay, got it. For
Yeah.
me, self
Even though
help.
I'm from oil and gas economy, right? It's completely
Yeah,
spoiled our country. Right? People have become lazy. They become complacent. And this is what I also love when I travel the Caribbean. So Trinidad is very different from most other territories. So we were, this is not my words, but we were kind of considered the New York of the Caribbean, right? We had the oil and gas, we had like lots of stuff going on here, but people have become lazy and inefficient, and it's 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 going to take generations for us to fix that.
yeah,
I call it the curse of the oil, to be honest with you guys.
yeah. I think it's a very common concept, especially in developing, resource-rich countries. So, overrated or underrated? Self-help books.
Underrated. So people think it's a lot of like woo woo stuff, but I firmly believe in it. You know, it's kind of like that mask that drops down on the plane. You need to be able to help yourself before you help somebody else, right? So I'm very much into like self development. I don't consume enough of it, but when I do, whatever I pick up, it's the application of it. So you could sit down, you could read it, but if you don't do anything with it, then obviously it'll be overrated. For me, it's highly underrated because I think everybody could be a better version of himself.
Nice. So let's continue on with overrated, underrated. Automation.
Automation,
Yeah.
underrated. So I'll put automation slash AI because that's ultimately what we're doing. Um, it's completely game changing, and I'm shocked. This is one of those things where I say everybody's wrong. What is wrong with everybody, right? Is what we've done over the last couple of years is that we've taken AI and automation and we've transformed the way that we do business. So when we started off, just the long and short of it, because we already had some experience in AI. So after I built out a practice that really was with the enterprises across the Caribbean with analytics, I saw AI come in, and I got into AI, and I still can't code and can't program, right? So maybe I'll save that for the next episode. But what we ultimately did when the world went on lockdown is we were having performance problems in my team, and I started to build little AIs for my team so that the AI could just do one simple task. And then at the same time, so our team, their productivity went back to the roof. They were spending less time doing things. At the same time, we were developing processes and systems and SOPs for everything. And now that we had the processes and we had the AI, we connected all our AI together. And now we've created fully autonomous processes um, where if you have you guys ever done any productivity training? So in productivity training, they say everybody works for 8 hours a day. Take your 8 hours, chop it up into 1 hour blocks, and do one thing per 8 hours. So every day you do 5 to 8 tasks. By the end of the year, you've done 9,600 tasks. My AI today does 10,000 tasks a day. I've added 365 people to my team without a dollar in payroll. Why
If
isn't everybody doing this?
if you miss that,
Underrated.
definitely.
Underrated, guys.
Leslie talked about this during the social media conference. Quick plug, next year social media conference. I don't know if Leslie's going to be there, but this is content you've been missing out. Okay, next one for me. Venture capital, overrated or underrated?
Overrated. So I don't really believe in it. I believe it comes with agenda. I believe you'll have to listen to whoever's giving you money. So I'd say venture capital, but I also say development finance, and it's kind of the same bucket. I look at it the same way. I think social media, I think digital strategies. If you look at, and it's really not a common strategy. It's a strategy that not many people really know about. But if you build your customer journey right, and you could figure out how to recover the cost of acquisition, the cost of your first sale, then you could scale your company infinitely. And that's what I'm going to be doing next year, guys.
Awesome. Think one more for Jean-Luc.
Yeah, there's one more. I'm gonna keep this one light because there's a lot of information going on right now. So, coconuts, overrated or underrated?
They just rated. I I love coconuts. Everybody loves coconuts. Who doesn't love coconuts? And they live up to their promise, man. They just rated.
Fair. I enjoy them as well, especially
Yeah,
coconut water. Okay, last one for me. I
yeah.
have to end it on this one. Bitcoin, overrated or underrated?
Overrated. No, no, I have zero interest in Bitcoin. I know a lot of people made a lot of money on it. For me, it's like a hustle. I'm not in a hustle. I want to play the long game.
Awesome. With
All
that
right,
being said,
let's give
Leslie,
Leslie an opportunity to give one more thing because there's a free giveaway. Leslie, I hope I'm allowed to plug data101.ai for people if they're interested in learning more about AI. And
Yeah.
this is a free giveaway that Leslie gives away on LinkedIn. So I thought, like, for the people that
Well,
have
what?
made it to the
Yeah.
end of this
What I'll
episode,
do?
yeah.
Yeah, is actually have a different workshop that I'll give away. So
Oh,
the
okay,
whole
awesome.
purpose of today was supposed to be AI. Although I guess that'll be the next episode. So what I'll do, I'll give away my AI workshop, guys. I don't know when the next one's coming up, but if you want to pre-register, what I'll do, I'll get you into a seat into the next one, whenever that one is.
Nice.
There you go. And I hope, where's the link?
We can put
Let
it
me
in the
check it.
chat here and we'll pop it up.
No problem. I think I lost my chat.
no worries. While you search that and we put it up,
Here we go.
as we close off, what's the best place where people can find you, reach out to you, or connect with you?
LinkedIn. Unfortunately, I'm one of those old boring guys that use LinkedIn.
Fair enough. We'll put Leslie's LinkedIn link as well in the description, or just search for him at Leslie Lee Fook and just say hi. Tell him
All right.
we sent him to you.
Awesome.
AIintensive.com. So if you want to sign up for a workshop, go to AIintensive.com and
Yeah.
you'll have your workshop. With that being said, Jean-Luc, any last thoughts and close us off?
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us, Leslie. It has been really interesting to learn more about your journey from Trinidad to the UK and back. This was a social conference. We look forward to seeing you again next week, same place, same time. Bye bye.